Amos P. Catlin, the Whig who put Sacramento on the map. In 1851, Amos Catlin walked up the South Fork of the American River looking for a dam site for his Natoma Water Company. The plan was to put in a dam and then build a ditch into the hillside with some flumes and run the water for the miners down into the Negro Bar area, the Folsom area before it became Folsom. This was the spot they selected. It was called Rocky Bar, a couple miles to the east of Salmon Falls. This is the remnants of the final dam before it was blown up when they built Folsom Lake and Folsom Dam. And even though Amos did not think that the Natoma ditch, the water and mining company that he established, was a significant accomplishment, it was. It was for Sacramento and the region for the water, and kept supplying water to northeast Sacramento for decades until they finally built Folsom Dam. In 1848, Amos was a young attorney in New York. He read about the gold discoveries here in California and decided that's something he wanted to do. He was kind of a reserved individual, and it probably surprised his family that he was going to take a sailing ship to California and mine for gold. His plan was to mine for some gold and also do some practicing of law, as he was an attorney. Amos arrives in San Francisco, 1849, and by August he's up at Mormon Island doing some prospecting. Now he also is doing some lawyer work in Sacramento with John Curry, a gentleman he knew from New York, and they kind of invested in some building of houses that kind of fell apart. And in 1850, he decided to create the Natoma Mining Company. And he was able to secure a claim near Mormon Island and then mined it. But it wasn't what we think of. Now, of course, the early gold miners, they were using the pans, and then they had the rockers and the long toms. But the big stuff, where the big gold came from, is they had to create a wing dam along the river and then take out all of this rock because the gold was on the bottom. And once they created the wing dam, and that was rocks and trees, and of course there was water always spilling into it, they had a steam engine to pump out the water. And so Amos did that through 1850, made some money. And he had a steam engine, but he didn't know really what to do with it after he had it and they were done money. He tried to sell it, but there were no takers. And he was convinced to haul it up to Shingle Springs because that area was right west of Placerville. And there was another company that was cutting shingles. There happened to be a spring nearby, Shingle Springs. And so he was going to start doing some lumber business. But of course, he also had the idea of this much larger water project that came about from his experience of damming portions of the river, creating ditches to divert the water around where they were mining, flumes with wood. And so might as well apply that to a larger concept, as the river gold was kind of pretty much being scoured out by 1852, 1853. But there was still gold in the hills, but you needed water up above that to efficiently work it. So that was the concept for the Natoma Water Company. Amos was so successful with the construction of the Natoma ditch that he was tapped to work on the North Fork ditch and complete that. So he created the American River Water and Mining Company to do that in 1855. So with the completion of that, he was running 2 waterworks projects. I mean, Amos was, doing the books. He was writing water receipts to miners that were paying for water. He had a little office up by Doton's Bar on the North Fork. And of course, his home base was at Mormon Island, where he bought a 50% interest in the Exchange Hotel. Now, all of that actually put Amos in a financial bind. He had to take out a lot of loans, and he fell into arrears paying on his stock in the Natoma company. But he was a young man, and he kind of bit off more than he could chew, because he was also operating the sawmill, and with the steam engine, and he had to buy a bigger steam engine. It's interesting to read the letters that he wrote home to his family, and he was trying to, well, he said, I can't even describe what I'm doing to you. I'm involved in damming projects. And he was from New York on the Hudson River. So the Hudson River is huge. I don't know if they really considered this a river back east. It's more of just a big stream. And so I don't know if they could get a concept of what Amos was doing, and he knew he really couldn't describe it. He really thought, when he was writing home to his family, that the steam engine and the sawmill, that was going to be the big payday for him, more than gold. That did not work out. It was the water company, the Natoma Water Company. He was running for office, first as for the Senate and under the Whig Party. And he was elected in 1852 to the California Senate and served in 1853 and 1854. It was in 1854 that he wrote the bill to permanently move California's capital from Benicia to Sacramento. But he was down there in Benicia, and he was away in other matters, so he was just juggling a lot. When he finally got done with his Senate term, he really focused on the water business. Matter of fact, he was approached to be an editor of like a monthly magazine of political events and whatnot, and he said, no. He'd kind of learned his lesson at trying to do too much, and so he just focused on the water company, the Natoma Water and Mining Company, the American River Water and Mining Company, and those companies were paying dividends. They were doing well. And then the train came into Folsom. But before it even got there, Amos got on board early, and he invested in the Sacramento Valley Railroad and was on the board. He was a director. So again, he had all these things going on in the 1850s, and he just really fell in love with the region. He kept telling his family that as soon as he made enough money, he'd come home. But as soon as he was elected to the Senate, everyone knew that Amos was never going back to New York. California was his home. And he fell in love with it. And he lived at Mormon Island and Folsom, and then moved to Sacramento, where he died in 1900. But like so many pioneers that immigrated to California, he fell in love with this state. Well, this is the approximate location of the little mining community of Negro Bar. They were mining down there along the American River. It's Lake Natoma right now. And then up the hill here, there was a road that went into Sacramento, and there were little homes and shacks. Amos Catlin visited Negro Bar on many different occasions for legal proceedings and political rallies, and he made speeches here because there was a pretty good little population. Now, Negro Bar was to be the terminus of the Sacramento Valley Railroad's first leg, because they had to get across the river, but they didn't have enough money to build a bridge. And the civil engineer who laid out the Sacramento Valley Railroad, Theodore Judah, also laid out a town grid. Now, initially it was going to be called Granite City, and then Captain Joseph Libby Folsom died in 1855, and the town was rechristened Folsom. So Amos was all on board. He could see the future and the prospects for this little community. And when he had the chance in 1856 and 1857, he purchased 13 full blocks And then when you add in all the individual lots that he bought, it totaled about 15 blocks, which was a little over 15% of the town of Folsom that Amos Catlin owned. Now, it's very possible that Amos saw Folsom as reminiscent of the villages that he knew of back in New York in the Hudson Valley. Kingston, he went to school in the Kingston, at the Kingston Academy. He spent time in New Paltz, and he could potentially see this vibrant little village of Folsom. He and several other men got together and proposed and put together the Folsom Literary Institute, which was a private school. Was focusing on languages and arts, but very similar to the Kingston Academy. And so he got that going because every little community needs an educational hub. One of the men involved in the Folsom Literary Institute was Dr. Alexander Donaldson, who had a daughter by the name of Ruth Ann. And Ruth Ann and Amos met, started talking, and were eventually married in 1860. So Amos initially saw Folsom as his landing spot. That was going to be his permanent home. He had moved from Mormon Island. He had sold his interest in the Exchange Hotel and moved to Folsom and had an office in a building downtown. He actually bought property south of Folsom, and he had what he called the Catlin Ranch. So this was to be his home. But of course, life has a way of changing. One of the first bridges across the American River was built by A.G. Kinsey and H.A. Thompson. And it was a wire rope suspension bridge. Now, both Kinsey and Thompson were investors in the Natoma Water and Mining Company, lived in Folsom, good buddies with Amos. Kinsey and Thompson, along with Amos, were also investors in the American River Railroad that was organized by Theodore Judah. Because after Judah had finished his contract with the Sacramento Valley Railroad, he was kind of in between gigs, still in California, had this vision for the Pacific Railroad, but he needed some money and some capital to start doing survey work. So that's what the American River Railroad did, is it allowed Judah to do some survey work out of Sacramento, kind of on the path that the Central Pacific would ultimately take. Now, Amos lent Judah some of his shares in the California Central Railroad and also lent him money in the late 1850s. Now, the other bridge that went across the American River was the California Central Railroad. That came online, begun in about 1857, 1858. Charles Wilson was leading that. He originally led the charge for the Sacramento Valley Railroad. Amos was all in with it. And Amos watched as they put up this tremendous wooden bridge to connect Folsom over to Ashland. Now, the California Central Railroad was to pick up where the Sacramento Valley Railroad had ended, but the mission was to get up to Marysville, have a railroad that went along the foothills, right at the base of the foothills, and pick up all that gold mining activity. Wilson had a little town laid out similar to what Judah did in Folsom, and Amos bought lots in the new town of Lincoln. Now, he never moved there. That wasn't his ideal, but he was trying to help out Charles Lincoln Wilson with this new railroad venture, because to have the Sacramento Valley connect to the California Central, and there was actually another railroad right up Folsom, Auburn, called the Sacramento Placer Nevada Railroad. But Amos was not involved with that until about the 1880s when he had to save the city of Auburn. So Amos was in this area watching all of this activity, these bridges, the big wooden, and then the trains running across. It must have been a really, really exciting time. The only fly in the ointment for a lot of the pioneers was the whole issue of land titles. And of course, no one really paid much attention to the Native Americans and any claims they may have had. They weren't citizens. That's a whole different story. But there were some issues with land titles, and that would come up, and Amos would have to jump into that. When the United States took control of California from Mexico after the war, everything was essentially federal property, federal land, except for the Spanish and Mexican land grants. That was part of the treaty. Now, in 1849, when the miners got here, they didn't really pay any attention to who owned water. They figured it was just all public land, you know, Native Americans, get out of here. Land grants, whatever. And Amos was kind of the same way, oddly, because he was an attorney and had studied property rights, land, titles. But he started the Natoma Water and Mining Company. He built a dam and a ditch. He didn't ask for approval. He just did it. Now, he didn't really have any problems because most of it was federal land until he got to the Leidesdorff land grant. So in 1844, the Mexican government awarded William Alexander Leidesdorff about 35,000 acres in a land grant that went from Sutter's land grant on the west to these things called the Lemuria, Spanish term, and I'm probably saying it wrong, low hills. And there were some different measurements involved, and everyone pretty much knew where the Leidesdorff land grant was. Right, the eastern boundary, right up that way on the other side of Folsom Prison. So the land grant went before the land commissioners in California in 1855. There was a survey done, the Hayes survey. Land commission passed off on it. However, there were those people that didn't want to see that map. They did not want to see the eastern boundary of the Leidesdorff grant so far to the east because it encompassed Folsom. Now, the map was put out, it was in place, and Folsom and the Folsom estate in particular said, Amos, your water canal is going across our land grant. Okay? You know, we got the map, it's good. You owe us rent, or you owe us a portion of the profits. Amos was kind of like, there was no way he could really fight it because he knew they were right. So Amos bought 9,000 acres of the Leidesdorff land grant, which encompassed this eastern portion all the way down to Alder Creek and included Folsom. Now within the title, the sale, the town of Folsom and the lots and the railroad were excluded. And of course, Amos had some latitude when it came to mining claims in the region. But Amos, being kind of the ethical and honest man that he was, he actually transferred that to the Natoma Water and Mining Company. He actually said, I'm just holding it in trust for the benefit of the shareholders. I'm not really sure why he had to do it, but he did. Now, the Hayes survey of the Leidesdorff land grant was contested. And I'm not exactly sure how it all happened, but those complaints got all the way to the Secretary of the Interior back in Washington, D.C. And that gentleman said, oh no, we need a whole new survey done because we look at the Lemuria as starting at Alder Creek, which was, that wasn't good for Amos or the people who had bought lots in Folsom. And there was a new survey done, the Mandeville survey. And if it were to be approved, Amos would lose, or at least have thrown into chaos, his title of a couple thousand acres that he just purchased for $36,000, and the lots that the Folsom estate had sold to people, including Amos in the town of Folsom. Now, this was all going before the district court judges, and it got kind of maybe fast-tracked, but it eventually made its way up to the Supreme Court. Now, the lead attorney for the Folsom estate was Henry Halleck out of San Francisco. Halleck was back in Washington, D.C., working for Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. The man who knew the most about the inner workings, the surveys, everything going on, Amos Catlin. Amos and his wife, Ruth Ann, board a ship in 1863, in the fall of 1863, and go back to Washington, D.C. He argues before the U.S. Supreme Court for the original map. It wasn't a big argument. It essentially had to do with geometry, and the justices agreed with him. It's done. The original map stands. Amos comes back, and there's a lot of happy people and unhappy people, but mainly happy people, because had the second survey been put into place, everything would have been thrown into chaos in terms of land titles. So Amos came back. One of his rewards was that he and his law partner, George Washington Bowie, were to be the primary agents for the sale of the Leidesdorff land grant. And so he made sales all the way through the 1860s of the property. But that was huge. And when he came back, people knew who Amos was. His name was all over the place. He was an attorney of repute and highly esteemed. He won a U.S. Supreme Court case. So he was still residing in Folsom. Him and Ruth had a daughter. She died at about 8 months in 1866. They had twins that died on the day they were born. And finally, later on in the late 1860s, their first son to survive, Alexander, was born. But things were changing kind of in Folsom. It wasn't developing as that village that Amos kind of envisioned. And because of his notoriety, he was spending more time in Sacramento. He actually had a part-time gig as a political editor-writer for the Sacramento Union. He was arguing more and more cases before the California Supreme Court, which met in Sacramento. So he was being pulled into Sacramento, and eventually Amos would have to leave Folsom to make his permanent residence with his family in Sacramento. He still owned property. He owned property with Charles Lincoln Wilson up in the Tehama-Lassen area. He loved this area. He would go down and vacation in Monterey. And so his heart was always kind of here, but really his business was in Sacramento. So the next chapter of Amos's life, becoming a Sacramento resident and fighting for the city of Sacramento. When Amos Catlin stepped off the sailing ship in 1849 into Sacramento, the city was about 10 feet lower. The Sacramento was 15 to 20 feet deep right out there, and the American River came into the Sacramento just not even a quarter mile up from where we're at right now. After the catastrophic floods of 1862, the city of Sacramento went on a mission to raise the city by at least one story. So the first floor of many buildings became the basement. And this was all to protect against flooding. And the big floods of 1862 happened before they moved the capital here. It probably wouldn't have happened because that flooding, there was water from all the way across the causeway. It was fairly catastrophic and fairly major. Now, after 1862, they redirected the American River. But one of the things they were noticing was that the Sacramento River was no longer as deep as it had been. It was filling up with debris, hydraulic mining debris, in short measure by water canals providing water to miners to sluice away hillsides. But of course, hydraulic mining was gaining acceptance, popularity up in the foothill regions, in the mountain regions, adding additional load, debris, slickens to the American River and Sacramento River. And this was causing more and more flooding all the time. In 1880, Sacramento sued a particular entity, the Gold Run Water and Mining Company, for depositing debris into the American River, which came down here. Now, Amos was defending the Gold Run Ditch Company, but one of the complaints from Sacramento City is that because of the hydraulic debris, the sewer system was not operable. And in the 1880s, Amos said, "What sewer system? Sacramento doesn't have a sewer system. We've got a collection of some pipes and some brickwork, and it all goes to an open slough south of R Street and heads down to Beach Lake. That's not a sewer system." So that was part of his closing arguments. And that caught the attention of a lot of people in Sacramento, and he was fairly well known. He was then asked to be on an advisory board that looked into how they could improve the sewer system and sanitation in Sacramento, and he made recommendations along with other citizens. But that was a real failing that he saw on the city's part, is not addressing the sewer problem. Amos lived on O Street, just a few blocks east of Edwin and Margaret Crocker, whom he both knew. In the mid-1880s, when Margaret wanted to donate her home and the art gallery to the city of Sacramento, it was Amos who negotiated the contract with the city to deed the house and the property to the city of Sacramento. Amos's son, Harry, actually attended some art classes at the Crocker Art Gallery at that time, learning how to draw. Amos really loved this area. His office down there at 2nd and K Street, that was not only his law office, but it was the center of his political activity. They were always having meetings there. Amos, after the Civil War, became a reluctant Republican. He didn't really like party politics. They always seemed to be kind of corrupt. He started two independent parties, the Citizens Taxpayer Party and the Independent People's Party, and actually had some success in getting candidates elected. Amos himself was up for the nomination for the governorship for the Independent People's Party, but he lost to Bidwell. In 1878, Ruth Ann dies. And obviously a shock to the family. And so Amos has to take some time to kind of, get everything put in order. It was also in the late 1870s that California decided it needed a new constitution, and who better to work on drafting a new constitution than Amos and other pioneer lawyers who had been here since before California had become a state. But Amos he couldn't do it. He had to decline being involved with that. However, the Constitution did pass, and that expanded California's Supreme Court, and Amos was nominated to be an Associate Supreme Court Justice. Again, that's really the only thing that Amos really pined for later in life, after being a senator and assemblyman, was to be a judge. That was really one of his big goals in life. That's something he wanted. He was embarrassed to ask for people's votes. He really didn't believe that judges should, actively campaign, because judges should be nonpartisan. As he always told people, he wanted to be fair and impartial, and he was embarrassed to ask for anyone's vote. So Amos really didn't actively campaign. He let one of his former law partners, Thomas McFarland, campaign for him, and Creed Hayman, but he didn't. And Amos didn't win. Had he gotten out there, he probably would have generated, the 10 or 15,000 votes that he needed to get him into the top 6 slots to be an associate Supreme Court justice, but he didn't do it. In 1890, Amos Catlin was elected a Superior Court judge in Sacramento County, and it was the most difficult job he had ever held. He worked morning and night, had a tremendous caseload. The only thing he didn't really hear were murder cases, but insolvent debtor, lots of divorces. In the 1890s, California, well, the country was in a recession, and economically things just weren't good. All sorts of different cases and libel cases. And one of those particular libel cases, Gilman v. Sacramento Bee, Amos ruled in favor of Gilman and awarded him $500 from the Sacramento Bee. And the Bee and Charles McClatchy were just outraged that they thought they were just reporting on a rape, and that should not constitute libelous reporting. That ruling by Amos Catlin would actually stand at the Supreme Court. However, there was another case that involved the Sacramento Bee that was a little bit outside the bounds, and that had to do with a divorce case that the Sacramento Bee was reporting on. And Amos closed the doors of the courtroom. The Sacramento Bee reported on it, and he was upset. He was upset about the content that the Bee published, and he was upset that Charles K. McClatchy was, didn't have any respect for the court, and so he found McClatchy in contempt of his courtroom. The Bee didn't like that one bit. Actually, that set off a lot of alarm bells for journalism. That case was not supported by the California Supreme Court. They found that Amos had not provided McClatchy due process. But the Bee went on a rampage and pretty much sunk Amos's re-election bid. And when I said earlier that he never really campaigned, in 1896, he did campaign because he wanted to keep being a judge. Even though it was a tremendously difficult position, he loved doing it. But public opinion was against him. And Amos was, late 60s, early 70s, and people in Sacramento didn't really know who this man was who came to Sacramento in California in 1849. It was just a different generation of people. So Amos did not win his re-election bid. He went on to continue practicing law and was involved in many other cases, but his health was declining. He actually slipped off of a streetcar and hit his head. And he kind of slowed down, although he kept practicing law virtually up until he died on November 5th, 1900. And Sacramento lost a great pioneer and a founder of, the whole institutions that govern Sacramento and California. And he is a man that should be remembered because he did a lot of good. And I'm obviously just hitting the high points. I was so gripped by Amos and his honesty, modesty, humility, and ethics that I wrote a book about him. So if you want to dive more into who Amos Catlin was, a pioneer lawyer and 49er in California, you can get my book, Amos P. Catlin, The Whig Who Put Sacramento on the Map.